you, everybody, for your patience. Thanks to John DePietro. He's going to be recording this, and we're going to share it with other people. But let me introduce what we're doing. So last summer, is this working okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Last summer at PorcFest, a group of about, 25 people got together to brainstorm how to fix schools. And one of the big things that we came up with was educating parents about what their options were. People that have different problems with the schools. I feel like I'm spitting into this. I don't like the way it sounds. And then one of the big ideas we came up with was to create a documentary that gets at all these different problems that parents can relate to and help them figure out what their options are, what the possibilities are, things they might not know about. So I've been working on this now and then since PorcFest, and today we're going to talk to you about Bullies all the way down. So, but before we get into that, I mean, that's our working title for this movie. What we would like to do is come up with a proposal that we can give to people to try to get funded to do this, like in a big way. For example, to EdChoice, right? They might fund something like this. So then the question is, should it be New Hampshire specific or not? I don't think it needs to be, because I think school...
If we're doing all the work, yes, it does.
If a national organization is paying us to do it, they're going to want it to be national.
Find a different donor.
Right. So, so that you'll see at the end, we're going to be asking for help for networking and so on to do that. But first, we need a presentation. So we're going to talk about what our ideas are, and then rally for help. So that's what we're going to do.
How do you advance here?
Yeah, right arrow, probably.
Right arrow?
Yeah, right arrow.
Okay,
Or not?
Or down arrow?
Down arrow?
Yeah. No, the right arrow on the. Use the mouse.
Oh, okay.
Right there. Right click.
Right click?
It was right on the right
Press
place. It was on the right place.
Right click?
It was. I'll do it. Here, why don't I?
Why don't you do it? Just hold on.
We should make a wireless mouse.
You think?
Yeah.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, that would.
All right, here we go.
Maybe if it looked like a remote control.
All right, so is everybody, well, I'll just tell you the story. So Bertrand Russell was giving a talk on cosmology, and he was explaining how gravity works and how galaxies are formed and a lot of stuff. And at the end of it, a woman comes up to him and she says, "But Mr. Russell, you're wrong about all that. The Earth is a giant plate and it rests on the back of a giant turtle." And he said, "Really? So what does the turtle rest on?" And she said, "Well, another turtle." He said, "And what is that turtle on?" And she said, "Oh, I see, you're being clever, but it's turtles all the way down." Right? And that's sort of where we got the title, because when you look at bullying, so next, Jody, next. So when you think about bullying, it's usually, you think of it as kid on kid, right? So this is, a lot of people have probably seen this. This is the Nashua video that went viral, where this kid got pulled to the ground, got the shit kicked out of her. So that's student on student. There are other, but we normally think of violence, and so that includes, next, I don't know if anybody saw this video from Texas, right, where the substitute teacher just wails on this kid and steps on his head at the end, right? So there's teacher on student bullying, right? And next, and of course there's cop on student bullying. But these are all physical bullying. So next, there's also, cyberbullying. But this is just one small part of what we're thinking of as bullying, right?
Right.
So when you think of bullying, to us, the essence of bullying is this phrase, "or else." Do what I tell you, or else. Which really means, when you think about it, there's a lot of anti-bullying stuff, and it's like, well, you should stand up, or you should teach bullies to be nice, or do whatever. But the opposite of bullying isn't being nice. The opposite of bullying is having a choice. That's really what it comes down to. And when you understand that that is what bullying is about, you can see, first of all, that bullying always, comes from somewhere and expresses, anybody who's being bullied wants to turn around and bully somebody else, just as an outlet, if for no other reason. But so that's the way that we're looking at bullying. We're taking that very abstract definition that if somebody is saying to you, you have to do what I tell you, or I'm going to hurt you. However, whatever the kind of hurting it is, and whether you're wearing a robe or you're, in a teacher in a classroom or you're a kid, it's all bullying. So next. Right, and so the insight that you can have about the entire public school system is it is based on bullying. Everything that happens there at every level is basically somebody saying, do what I tell you, sit in that desk and be quiet. Do this test, study this thing, earn these credits, right? Take this money from those people, spend it on these, put this kid in that class, even if he's going to disrupt everything. Everything is based on bullying.
Right, even telling teachers what to do day to day. The
Right.
curriculum, the standards that they need to cover.
Curriculum frameworks.
Whatever you're calling. So, and this is very obvious from the student's point of view. So here's a problem we can all work together. Which lines would go where? Next. It's a trick question. They're both the same, right? But so we think of it from the student's point of view. And that's very obvious, but next. So yeah, can you shrink that? So basically, this is the key here is the arrow indicates do what we tell you or else, right? And these are all the different directions in which bully is going. The courts are bullying, the legislature is telling you, well, we just invented a right and a responsibility and you have to do something about it. And then the legislature turns to the Department of Ed and says, well, you have to make rules that implement these bogus ideas that we gave you. And the Department of Ed turns around and tells the districts what to do and doesn't give them a choice. And the districts tell the teachers what to do, and the teachers tell parents and students what to do, and it all goes down. And like, what's the phrase, shit flows downhill, so does jargon, so does bullying. And at the very bottom of all this, of course, are the taxpayers who have no recourse whatever. So this is what we mean, by bullying all the way down. So there's a question, this is a question I like to think about when talking about taxes especially, is, let's say you're trying to raise a moral kid, somebody who knows the difference between right and wrong, and understands part of right and wrong is that you shouldn't take people's stuff without their permission. You shouldn't steal from people. And yet, you are sitting surrounded at all times by stuff that's paid for, by stealing. And so the words you're saying are being blatantly contradicted by the things that they're seeing, right? And so, on the one hand, you don't want the kids to be stupid, but on the other hand, you kind of would like it if they could just miss that obvious fact. So there's a second question similar about schools, which is, how do you end bullying? They talk about this, we have to end bullying, we have to do that. How do you do that in an institution where virtually everything is one kind of bullying or another? Almost everything that happens represents that. And so, you think that if the opposite of bullying is choice, then school choice should be the answer, right? School choice, that's what we need, school choice. But school choice is moving a kid from one school to another, which is a little like, to say that that's going to end bullying is sort of like saying, we can get rid of prison brutality with prison choice, right? We'll just let people choose what prisons they want to go to. It's not really going to address it. And so there is school choice. And school choice, not to denigrate it, it has worked beautifully for some people, but there's so many more kinds of choice that don't involve just jumping out of a frying pan and into a fire. And that brings us to the movie, right? And the point of the movie, in some sense, is to explore the rest of that iceberg. Because there are people talking all over the place about school choice and vouchers, and we need to get private schools paid for, religious schools, and should we do this or that. But there's so many other kinds and ranges and levels of choice that nobody's even talking about because all the attention is going to school choice. And for a lot of parents, a lot of teachers, a lot of anybody, that they need to hear this stuff. So that's the point of the documentary. The idea is that we would start with something very dramatic, We might start with something like that Nashua video where you're just like, what the hell? What? And so we were thinking, this is like, that's the what the fuck moment. You're just like, what? That can't be happening. And yet it is, right? And so, you know, then in this case, you'd have the video, you'd have the parent starting to talk to you about, here's my experience. This happened. My kid comes home. She got a concussion. She got a broken rib. I go to the superintendent, and this is an actual quote. This is the superintendent's response, right? That using social media depicting children fighting is wrong. That's what he's complaining about. Not the actual violence, but that somebody dared to videotape it and put that up on social media. So, of course, this is, you know, again, this is the what the fuck moment. So then we go to the it's even worse than you think moment, where you start to look inside what's actually happening and you go, wow, I thought it couldn't get worse, but it does, right? And so here you've got, now they're promising to punish anybody who records any terrible thing, and it's like, you know, so it's they just obviously have no interest, and of course they're looking to law enforcement for support and guidance on this, which is, you know, well, they're the experts in violence, so I guess they're the ones you want to talk to. And so, you know, this would be and then in this part we would and this is, you wanted to talk about a few examples of actual just physical bullying, right? To just start you out with what everybody recognizes as bullying.
Right. So I need to be reminded. Oh yeah. So there was a Facebook conversation. Somebody posts, it was in the Upper Valley group, that her kid was beaten up by somebody. I forget, a concussion. So similar stories to what you're hearing, and all of the posts about it, all of the comments were like, raise charges, bring up charges on the school and the parents and so on. And I'm like, take your kid out of the school. Just remove him. And the response to that was, don't do that, because then you can't press charges. And it's like, excuse me, is this not about safety? And then, well, so, should I keep going on that? So, and then she's like, how can I do that? How can I take my kid out of the school? I'm like, depends, where do you live? So she lives in Vermont, right? Not New Hampshire. I was like, oh, you have more choices in Vermont than you do in New Hampshire. There's basically more town tuitioning in Vermont than there is in New Hampshire. I was like, just go to the school board and tell them you want your kid in a different school. In fact, go to the school district you want to go to, and you can have your kid sent there. So people don't know what their options are, right? They need to know, and that's what we want to use this video for, is to tell them that there are options. They just don't know. So that was the first story, or is that all together? Oh, ha. So I also, having been around school choice and being on the school board, I got calls from people all over the state about all different kinds of things. And there was one parent whose kid was being bullied. She wanted to pull him out of the school. Well, I start from the bottom. It's like, you got to work your way up the hierarchy, if you will. It's like, did you talk to the superintendent? Oh, yeah. Except the superintendent said, oh, bullying? Well, nobody's committed suicide yet, so we're not doing anything about bullying. True story.
Worse than you thought.
Exactly. So then what do you do from there?
Right. So, and then the third part of every little story would be that there are these, it wouldn't necessarily be talking heads sitting around telling you what you can do, but there are choices, and that's the point. There's always something you can do, but if you don't know that you can do it, then you'll never get it. So basically, so go ahead. Next. So that's like one, we think of one unit, right? One unit is, what the fuck? It's even worse than that, but there's good news. There's something you can do, no matter who you are, no matter what your situation is. And so that, essentially, the movie then is broken up into those pieces, and there's a bunch of those pieces. And so you're
I'm on it. So I got a list of stories just being in the tiny town of Croydon. Some of them are outside Croydon, but most of them are in Croydon. And if they're happening in my little town, what else is going on in the world? So what do we got? So we have the what the fuck moment is, there was a girl in the 4th and 5th grade who was basically showing all the symptoms of depression. We didn't know this until afterwards. 4th and 5th grade in Newport schools, and it's worse than you think. Now I have to remember what this order was. Help me out.
the worst than you think is they found out what the reason was for so the teacher was partly bullying the student and just saying, suck it up.
Right.
Just not
So it's
getting
worse
any
than you
help.
think. So then this parent went to the principal and the superintendent to help her kid, and the response was, "Oh, that teacher's having some problems at home, so we're giving her a pass." It's like, this isn't about the children. It's worse than you think.
And it makes you wonder what else. How many other teachers are like that? How many other students? This is the one parent who stood up and said, "Look, we have to do something." And this was after they put the kid on drugs.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, therapy, drugs, the whole thing. Yeah, they tried everything and nothing worked. Well, except something did work. That was just before we got school choice to go to private schools. This child was our poster child, and she went to private school and came out of her funk almost immediately. So yeah, it's an amazing story. So that's teacher on student. So we had a superintendent in Croydon last year who was just awful. She was with us for a little less than 2 years, and she was bullying the teachers. And we didn't know this well. We didn't know this until, the teacher principal that we have, she was really hesitant to say anything to us as a school board. She came to all our meetings, and she eventually told one of the school board members on the side in private that basically the superintendent was bullying her, threatening her, like, "You have to do this, otherwise it's insubordination and I'll fire you." She was just holding this over her head the whole time. But it took her a long time till she spoke to a school board member. And then we learn, so it's worse than that. Nobody liked her. We lost lots of staff because of her, but it took us time to figure it out. She was also really lousy at budgeting and management. It was ridiculous. It was just worse than we thought, and we helped her see her way out the door. So now that was the good news. So that's super to teacher. So school board members. So sometimes people like us get on school boards, and the rest of the school board doesn't like us. And so if the chair, and so Doris Hohensee in Nashua, classic case, they wouldn't let her speak. She's an elected official, and they wouldn't allow her to state her opinion about anything. And then, to make it worse, they would find things. God forbid they found out she was hanging out with Free Staters, right? She would have been lambasted for that. But they found all sorts of things that they were trying to, get her. They can't dismiss her because she's an elected official. You just can't do that. But they wanted to get her to quit. She was never quitting. So the bad news in this case was she didn't get reelected to school board. And so bad news is for the kids, really, because she was the only one looking out for them.
There's a little bit of good news in that story, which was the school board chair got caught doing a bunch of illegal stuff to try to get rid of her. So at least there was some publicity that came out of it. But in that case, there really wasn't that much that Doris could have done. Although we would want to talk to other school board members and say, what would you have done in that situation? And maybe there are things they could have done.
Yeah, we don't know. And that chair did not get, nothing happened even though they did all these illegal things. Oh no, we're allowed to be, we're above the law. It was for a good reason. It's just amazing. So then there's the classic story of the Department of Ed bullying Croydon, right? We, after an agreement by the Department of Ed, started sending our kids to private school, as I just told you. And then they decided, oh no, you're not allowed to do that. And they started threatening us with letters, scary letters. And I was chair at the time of the school board, and I was like, well, let's respond to this, not just pull the kids out of private. First of all, the first time they did it, it was the middle of the year. Take your kids out of private schools now. And it was like, really? You want to remove kids in the middle of the year? Is that the best situation you can imagine for a kid? Oh, you're right. We'll let you stay there till the end of the year. No, it didn't occur to anybody to think about the children. Unbelievable. So where do we go with this?
So that's the what the fuck moment that they're doing that. The really it's worse than you think came if you go and look at what happened during this a hearing, where it's just the arguments that were being made, by the assistant attorney general were just what? Like one of the arguments she made was, oh well, yes, technically the department sent somebody to talk to you, but since that wasn't the head of it wasn't the commissioner, then nothing she said is binding. And I was like, wow, I want to do that next time I'm pulled over by a cop. I want to say, wait, are you the head of the Department of Safety? Oh, well then nothing you say is binding, right? They were redefining common words in the English language. They were just making...
I have the transcript if anybody
so
wants
again,
to
it's
see it.
you think it's bad enough what they're doing, but then you start looking at the thinking or lack of thinking that's going into it, the reasoning that's going on, and you suddenly realize this is just so much worse than I thought it was.
Didn't they actually say that children were the property of the state in that case?
That might have been some case. I'm not sure it was this. In this case, they redefined,
Not limited to.
yeah, including but not limited to mean just including
just
only.
include, right.
Right, this is like, whoa.
And the judge, and we lost that case. The judge ruled in favor of them. The good news was we had energy and we found funding, and we had funding for the legal fees, but we got a law passed. We went through the legislature instead and got the law passed so we could ignore the Department of Ed's ridiculous movements. And that's the good news, and it sometimes takes a lot of work to do the good news, but you can still do it. Yeah.
But you have to have people who are willing to look for options, to look for choices. That you never just take or else at face value. You actually go, well, or else? What? Maybe there is an or else, and I'll take that. I'll take what's behind door
And
number 2.
sometimes it's a loophole, and Ian's got the last story we have. These aren't the only. Like I say, this is in our small town, right?
Right, so this is the Department of Ed being bullied by essentially teachers' unions. Frank Edelblue gets appointed Commissioner of Education. He's got an opening for somebody to work on math standards. He goes, do I know anybody who would really be good at this job? Hey, Ian, you want this job? I'm like, sure, I'll do that. And then suddenly, the unions and essentially, the public unions are stepping in and saying, no, we own this job. Nobody can have this job unless they, have a certain amount of classroom experience and have taken professional development credits. And the irony is, I was the guy who used to teach the developmental, the professional development courses, but I hadn't actually taken them. And so just for years, it was just like, you can't do this. Sorry, you can't do this. And then, you talk to people, you look for ideas, and it turns out there may be a path forward, which is if I form an LLC, he can contract work out to an LLC, and the LLC doesn't have to have professional development credits. So again, it's just, there's always, water flowing. Water will always find a way to the lowest point, and there's always some way to do this. So anyways, but this is the kind of collection that we would put together. And it's not just kids getting beat up. It's judges bullying legislators and legislators who find a way around it. This is, superintendents bullying school boards and school boards taking that power back. So the idea, again, is bullying at all levels, and there's always something that can be done. So there's also, we would want to have some little investigation sort of abstractly into what bullying really is, what causes it, and especially the two kinds of bullying that we think about. The one, the kid beating up somebody else or the teacher yelling at somebody. It's like, well, I'm miserable. I'm having a shitty time, so you might as well too, right? So that's one source. And the other source, of course, is I'm just doing what's best for you, so sit down and shut up, right? Because you're not smart enough or capable enough to make decisions for yourself, which is basically government. And at the low level of this, there's a thing that I've been in conversation with people talking about, and it's sort of like, I'm sort of guided by Richard Branson's idea where he would say, if I want a new business, I want to find people who are underserved and then give them a better deal, right? And so part of that would be, yes, we can have scholarships, we can change the laws, we can do a lot of things, but at the same time, right, there's this, it's almost a joke, mushroom management, right? You put people in the dark, cover them with shit, and hope that they do okay. But I've actually been thinking about something I would call mushroom learning. And the idea is you could be in the crappiest school in the world. You could have teachers who know less than you do. You could have, a situation where there's no resources, nothing's available to you, but if you have a few fundamental things that you can do, you can read, write, and think, you can actually thrive. You can thrive even if you're in the dark covered with shit. And this is, in some sense, the ultimate choice that you can make, and we would want to include this, right? This is sort of an Epictetus Stoic level choice, that there's stuff you can't control, but there's stuff you can control, and what you can control is what's in your head. Right? Nobody can take that away from you. Nobody can actually make you think about something or stop thinking about something if that's what you want. So that would be one of the levels of choice that we would want to put people, make people aware of. That like, look, yes, maybe you as a parent can't get your kid out, and the government isn't cooperating with you, and the school board isn't, nobody's cooperating with you, but you can prepare your kid to thrive anywhere. So that's sort of, there's the high level, we'll have lawsuits, we'll change the law, we will, put pressure on people, get parents to show up. But at the lowest level, you can control what you do. And that's always your choice. And that's the ultimate choice. When you talk about education choice as opposed to school choice, that is your choice to either become educated or not. So one of the things that we are hoping to do is to raise this question in people's mind, which is, what would education look like without bullying? Right? And so if you start looking at the kinds of things that cause bullying, or the forms of bullying, like mandatory attendance, you got to be there whether you want to or not, and you got to be there till you get a piece of paper or enough years pass. The fact there's a mandatory curriculum, yeah, you got to have credits in this and this and this, even though that has nothing to do with what you want to do with your life. Mainstreaming, we'll just put all these kids together, even though they're all at different levels of development, they just happen to be the same age. The fact that you live here, therefore you got to go to that school, or you're in this age, you got to be in that grade. The fact that unions basically own everything. You got partisanship, which is, the latest example of that is the Democrats just sort of in a pissing contest saying, oh yeah, we don't need $46 million that we could use on charter schools, just to make some kind of weird point. The fact that there's a monopoly, right? The fact that you have this entitlement situation where you've got, like in our town, we have people on fixed income. They're just, eating dog food and clipping coupons so they don't lose their houses to property taxes, and they're paying money to send kids to school whose parents make 10 times as much as they do, which is insane. Just the levels of bureaucracy, the rules, and here's the rulings, and here's the rules, and here's the laws, and so on down there.
Yeah, policies.
And of course, the big one, of course, theft. That is itself a huge form of bullying. So you can, what if you could sweep these away? What if they were gone? What would that look like? What would education look like? Next. Because what a market is. If you get down to, the essence of it, yeah, a market is people providing services, but the essence of a market is there's no bullying. There's always a choice. You can always, if you don't like what some guy's offering, you can leave and go somewhere else. Unless there's a monopoly, and if the state's there, enforcing monopoly, that doesn't work. But that is basically what you would get. And so the problem with the market is if you say the word market, people panic. And so one of the sort of sneaky things about the movie, the documentary, would be to allow people to come to this conclusion on their own. Well, what if we didn't have that? Ooh, that would be nice. What if we didn't have that? What if we didn't have? What if we didn't have? What if we didn't have? Well, what's left after you get rid of all that? What's left is a bunch of people doing what they think is best. Right? Now, what it doesn't take into account is, we lost that. Anyways, so the picture here is we're actually closer to a market than anybody suspects. And the reason we are is you think, oh my God, we'd have to change all these laws. We might have to change state constitution. We'd have to have lawsuits, and somebody would have to go in and sue Volinsky, whatever. This big mess to get that changed. But that's not true, and here's why. The RSA that actually covers all this says that a district is responsible for paying for a kid's education until he reaches a certain age or he has a diploma. Some enterprising town, the school board, a simple majority in a school board, could simply, on the next school day, award a diploma to everybody. And you're done.
You should totally run next year.
Now it's in the parents' court, right? Okay, now your kid has the diploma. Now, he wants an education. You're going to have to figure that out, and what it means, and how it should work, and what's important and what's not, and how to pay for it. Okay? So we could do that. What that doesn't take into account is that there are some people who couldn't afford to do that very well. And so you would like to help them. And ideally, the pure libertarian solution is charity. But there's a quasi-libertarian solution, which is, I think of as the libertarian palatable solution, where you can hold your nose and swallow it, right? What you don't want to be is surrounded by idiots. You don't want to be surrounded by people who aren't literate, who aren't numerate, who are irrational. Because those people will elect people who will take away all your rights.
You don't say, Ian.
Okay? I know this will come as a surprise to some people, but that's actually how it works, right? And if you look at least in the New Hampshire Constitution, to the extent that you care about it, it actually does say when you enter into a state of society, you can surrender some of your rights for the protection of others. Not for charity, not to make things fair, but to protect your other rights. And this is actually an example of that. Okay, if those kids, if you're surrounded by idiots, your rights, all of them, are in danger all the time. But if we want to take that, then there is a way. There is a standard model for helping people who can't afford things, right? You can give them money to buy food, and there's only certain places they can go and certain things they can spend it on. You can give them money to buy heating oil. You can give them money to get an apartment someplace. Look, it's a choice, housing choice, right? You can help them with getting health insurance. You can just give them help with anything, temporary assistance for needy families, whatever it is that you need. You can go and you can get help with that if you demonstrate that you need the help. Down to Medicaid. And so the thing I'm always proposing is that we need an Educate program where we just treat it that way. It's like, look, if you can afford it, do whatever you want. If you can't afford it, show that you can't afford it. We'll give you some money, right? As opposed to what we're doing now is sort of like if the government said, well, people need food, let's start some farms, right? Or people need housing, let's build some houses.
Well, they've done
That's right. That's how we're. Yeah, and look how well that worked. Yeah, and that didn't work out so well, right? So we've given up on that. It's like, no, we're not going to build projects. We're going to give people money so they can buy from private providers. And you think they should have learned something from housing projects, right? It's just school apparently has not failed as badly as housing projects have, so they haven't got the message yet. So that's one way this could go. Now that would.
But we'll talk with John. All right, we're back.
So if we look at this interesting table, we see that the number of registered Democrats in the United States is actually larger than the population of a lot of European countries, right? And so what this says to me is, if Spain or the Netherlands or Italy or the United Kingdom could do single-payer whatever, single-payer medical care, single-payer education, single-payer food, whatever it is, then the Democrats could do it. They could just do it. They could just say, we're going to take everybody, all the Democrats, give us your money, we'll set up schools, we'll run them the way that we all think we should, which is essentially no choice at all.
What's that?
And we'll do it, okay? So, at some point, you want people in the Democratic Party to start thinking, it's not the Republicans who are standing in our way. It's our own leaders. They're the ones who aren't doing what we want. So again, this is something, is this likely to happen? I don't know. This is an idea I'm pushing. And so I hope that, sometime this could happen. And so one of the ways I'm pushing it is, next, a lot of people might be familiar with this phrase, ontology recapitulates phylogeny. For those who aren't, it just means that when you are developing as an embryo, you go through roughly the same stages that the human species went through during evolution. And I think of, it's sort of in a competition for how can you cram the most information into the fewest words and sound really erudite at the same time. So I'm pushing another one, which is topology obviates geography, which simply says, now that we live in an age when everything's networked, where you are matters almost not at all. Right? If we want to share money or information or goods, I don't care where you live. We don't have to live next to our job. I don't have to live next to you. You don't have to live next to me. And we can have people in between us who are doing their own thing. And so this is sort of the source. If you ever wanted to get this sort of voluntary socialism or, voluntary,
Cooperation.
Well, I'm thinking the other side of that, which is you want to have enforcement of moral codes, but I don't know of a convenient word for that. It's the same sort of thing, that you can do this without having to rope everybody in just because they live next door to you. So I would like to see this idea actually pushed until it just becomes a thing that's natural for people to understand.
Except that we are literally a geographic movement, so that seems a little counterintuitive to me.
And yet the people that you, even as a geographic movement, you're doing that as a realistic thing because now the laws work that way. But as they stop working that way, right, you could live anywhere. And that's something that people are coming to realize as they do things like telecommuting, right? I don't have to live near my job. I can, if I need something, I don't have to live near where it's produced. I can get on Amazon. I can have stuff shipped to me.
And in
right?
fact, it's because of that that we can be a geographic movement. People can move here because they can hold their jobs in other places. They don't have to just take them with them here. But more than that, in education, they talk about teaching 21st century skills. I suppose I should stand up. 21st century skills. This is a 21st century skill that they're not teaching, and this is something that needs to get in there.
And so this is a huge fountain of choice. If you take this idea seriously, your choices are not constrained by what you're next to. That's the idea here. And so I think that's and I'm wondering, like, is that too big for a hashtag? But apparently it's not. So everybody start pushing that. And so this basically brings us to the end. And so what we're looking for is this: a complete movie. Right? That you can have at showings, you can get people together, teachers groups, parents groups, whatever, sit down, show it, have a discussion. But we want to break it into these themed pieces for two important reasons. One is they're more easily shared. Like, if I send you a movie, I say, hey, here's a 2-hour movie, watch it, because there's 10 minutes that relates to you, you're not going to do it. Even if I say, here's a 2-hour movie, watch it starting at minute 48, you're still not going to do it. But if I know that you're having a problem that has to do with a school board, or it has to do with corruption, or it has to do with kids being beat up, or kids beating up teachers, or whatever, here's a piece that you can look at, and you can share that. So that's one reason for breaking it down. The second is to use each of those as a nucleus in a website where people who have that issue, that concern, have that problem, can come and share strategies, can share stories, can share resources, can actually cooperate and collaborate to help each other deal with that problem and discover what their choices are. So that's why the movie is structured this way. And so,
Right. I mean, this is... Wow, that's not showing my home email address. How about that? It's weird.
oh, it's gmail.c. It's the C word.
Deb, no. Yeah, that's right. So I basically send me an email if you're interested, if you have thoughts. We will probably post this video somewhere, and if it's on Facebook or whatever, we can have discussions there in the School Choice New Hampshire group. I think Michelle said that would be a good place to do this. But we need help, right? Think about these things. We want to put together a package, and maybe it's a talk with slides that it's just annotated, and we can send that to different places and say, here, watch and listen. But what we think we want to do is do one vignette, like get somebody to interview, and figure that out. And maybe somebody we have stories out the wazoo, but maybe somebody else has some interesting stories, and we could just put them in the list. So just share those with us if you have any things that you know about. But we need people to help write. Once we get funding, because we will, we're going to need. We need people to help us orchestrate this presentation, first of all, right? How to get this to be good, to get funding. We need people who know people who have money that we can send it to. So we need networking. I'm not doing this in any particular order there. You have a list on that thing, so you shouldn't have shut that. No.
Oh, you have a list of skills.
We need... But in the end, we want to get funded so people actually get paid to do this. It's not to be a volunteer thing, but just to let's do this. We're going to need website developers. We're going to need content people to do research, right? What's it like in different states? We're going to build this up, different things. So throwing that out there. What we want now is comments on this, thoughts that you have. We can talk now for sure, but keep it going. That's what we want.
I feel very strongly that if I was to give my time and efforts, I would want it to be about New Hampshire.
Only? Okay.
Okay, and that's a place to start, certainly.
It is. Right, we can...
And we have enough horror stories.
We do. We obviously do.
Sadly.
What is your end goal? You get this movie produced, you get the funding, whatever, and you get people to watch the movie. Is it just to educate the public that school choice is the way to go?
It's not about school choice. It's about choice.
Yeah, it's about choice. What we want is for parents to take action because now they don't realize they can. Parents, everybody, parents, teachers, school board
Yes,
members.
it's to educate parents.
Here's my concern, and I'll make this relevant. In 2006, I was the LPNH nominee for governor. One of the special interest surveys I got was from the AFT. The very last question was, are you a member of the Free State Project? It was on a candidate survey.
It was the very first question that the Police Association asked Victoria Sullivan when she ran for mayor.
I also
so
ran
since
for
we don't have-
selectman. I
since we
also
did-
ran for selectman in Hudson, and the first special interest group to interview me was the Hudson Police Patrolmen's Association.
Since we don't have members, the answer is no. Go on.
Well,
Thank
the
you.
reason I brought that up is, let's say the logical conclusion, you produce this movie and parents are really, it becomes almost a movement that there's, what I'm seeing is, for example, in many school districts, enrollment is down, but tax rates for the schools are going up. It doesn't matter how few students there are, and you mentioned Doris Honerty. I used to sub in Nashua, and one of her kids was in my class, and I said, oh, and I didn't embarrass the kid in front. I said, I'm saying to myself, your kids are going to school for a certain skill, but I talked to Doris afterwards, and they guess there's certain skills that they'll use the public schools. But my concern, let's say the public schools go away, you're going to have this big bureaucracy of teachers. Who's to say that they're going to just not funnel money into these teachers? They don't have to have any students, they just have to be paid, and they can sit on their backsides. I mean, they do that in New York City. If a teacher's found guilty of molesting children, they can't fire them. It's cheaper for them to just put them in this thing called the rubber room. How are you going to use a metaphor, starve the monkeys?
Carla has an idea.
So a historic parallel to I think what you're asking would be to look at what happened in England in the 70s and 80s under Margaret Thatcher, when the United Kingdom at that stage was 90% state-owned, and they had to make very hard decisions, and departments were cut and things were cut. I think part of what we could be doing when we talk about these issues is to address that preemptively by actually saying to people, let's start to figure that part out. So because I do a lot of police accountability work rather than education, I mean, I've certainly been talking about the fact that police departments need to be cut by 50 to 60% when we end the war on drugs, because there's no justification for it. So if we all understand that, and if we can get our neighbors to understand that, then the question becomes, how can we work together to ease this out over a decade? Even if it is that we need to pay, I mean, I'm at the stage where I'm like, if we had to pay every single union member in New Hampshire their full pension to fuck off, why not do that and then do a clean slate going forward? So I think part of our job is going to be to come up with the proposals to say, in 10 years, this is what this is going to look like. And I think this is a step in that direction.
It would be remarkable if we actually had a complete, comprehensive, foolproof answer to that. I will say this. If you have a bunch of ants in your house, you can put down poison, you can try to stamp them out, you can do all kinds of things, or you can put a big pile of sugar outside the house. And the ants will find the sugar and they'll leave. And I think if you find something that a lot of teachers hate their jobs, a lot of cops hate their jobs. If you help them find jobs that they would like better, that's not even a problem.
That's my point. Basically, they have to address, because you mentioned cutting police departments 50 to 60%. The unions are not publicly funded. They're funded by indirectly through teachers who part of their salary has to go to the union whether they like it or not, but the
all
Well,
union,
not
taxpayers.
anymore.
union's a private entity. You said not anymore?
Well, the Janus decision for public servants, no one can be forced into a union anymore because of a Supreme Court
Oh.
decision from last year. And in New Hampshire, which I thought was an interesting number, 420, funny that I would remember that, but 420 union workers chose this year to not re-up on their union position. It was a 30% drop, I believe was the number. So
And they don't have to pay agency fees?
they don't have to pay agency fees anymore. This is only for public sector workers. It's not. But basically what that's saying is I think we're trending towards more voluntarism. And I apologize because I just realized the camera's on for my swearing, because really, I mean, what we're talking about is to give everyone choices. And just because it's a group of people who have to also choose, like they don't get to force us to give them their comfort, right? So
That's a nice bullying story with a good outcome too. That could be used in this. Teachers having been forced, and then this decision coming down, and they're not forced to be.
Right.
Okay.
I mean,
Thank
so you have, before you can get significant political change, you have to have a cultural change. You have, and this is all we're doing is trying to get people again to start thinking, wow, maybe we don't need that, and maybe we don't need that, and maybe we don't need that, and what else don't we need? You know?
I mean, I think culturally people have forgotten what freedom is. I genuinely think. I mean, let's think about this just for 2 secs, right? So schools, I think, is such a beautiful metaphor for our challenges, because we made the joke earlier about the prisons and the schools, but really there is very little distinction. So in both
wasn't
of those, no, I understand, but in both of those, the government has full control. So on the one hand, we're telling people this is the land of the free and the home of the brave. You have these rights. You have the right to speak. You have the right, to stick your finger to authority. That's an actual right. And then we put them in this place where we say, well, except here, where we have 100% control over you, you have none of these rights. And so we're raising children to literally not understand the world, and that is cruel, and we need to stop. And we need everyone around us to start to understand that. You can't actually have cognitive dissonance where you are telling people they're free and then literally enslaving them for 8 hours every day with no rights.
For 12 years.
For 12 years.
That's not what
Which is
Orwell
a
said.
horrible prison sentence.
While they're being brainwashed.
While they're being brainwashed.
Right, but I mean, so I think of it, the great psychologist Tyler Durden said, that what we have to do is remind people of the power that they still have. And the power, you don't make choices unless you think you have the power to do it. And so what we're dealing with, the first step, there's a lot of steps. There's no doubt, there's a lot of steps to this. The first step is reminding people they have choices. Even if it's not apparent that they have choices, just if they start to look a little deeper, if they just ask the question, well, okay, or else, well, what are my else's?
We are
Right?
the choice movement, and I think a lot of people don't want to use that because they associate it with abortion or something, but from a
Right.
messaging standpoint, my education, my choice, my body, my choice, my whatever it is your choice, and that is what freedom is.
Right, and so we're trying to, in some sense, reclaim the word choice, so it's not just school choice, right? It's education choice. It is your personal choices about this huge aspect of your life, and picking a school is
Life
one
is
small
choice.
part of that.
Should be.
Life is choices. That's all life is.
I think.
Am I wrong?
Good, Emily.
I was gonna say, I think I wasn't sure what my activism was necessarily in the community aside from food freedom, which is obvious, but
Best pork in the world.
We put the pork in Pork Fest.
My basic friends with me know that I overshare everything that happens with my kids. But to me, that's my activism for homeschooling is that, or whatever schooling you want to call it. Currently, Iris wants to call it game schooling. It's a real thing. But I think the more that I share that and the more that people see that, and not just me, but like everyone who's sharing it, the more it normalizes it, the more it becomes like, oh, there's other options. Oh, like you're homeschooling, but like you're out doing activities with other kids like 5 days a week. Like, oh, like
That's
I didn't
education.
realize
You're not locking your
that.
kid in a closet? What?
Yeah.
That's what I do.
But and the parents that I talk to, who their kids are in public school or whatever, and they're just like, oh yeah, I could never do that though, because I couldn't just sit at home and teach my kid. I'm like, you don't have to. There's this thing called the internet. It's really
First of all, you do.
Yeah, what's that thing I keep hearing about?
yeah.
Teaching your kid every day.
So parents they don't realize that they have choices. Well, they think there's one choice and it's homeschooling, but they don't have any clue the broad spectrum that is, unschooling or whatever, all these different choices. And I think that's a huge aspect to people realizing it, not just of like school choice, but among like if you're choosing to be your kid's educator or your director of education or whatever you want to call it, how big that can be, and like how easily you can do it with other people teaching your kids, not necessarily you.
And that
has
should
to
be
one
in the
of
movie.
vignettes. Of course.
Yeah, Emily's gonna be in the movie for sure.
She's an actress, man. She's trained.
I don't have to act.
I mean, and getting part of what she's getting at there is I hate the term homeschooling because it is so suggestive and misunderstood.
Well, the reason I like it, though, is that I want to make people realize that it's not just like I want to still call it homeschooling because I want to break that stigma. I guess is my point.
Right, whereas I'd rather call it like we've talked about this, parent managed education or parent directed education or something like that, where it's clearer from the name that it's like, right, I'm making sure that my kid gets what he needs, which is not necessarily me sitting down and teaching him chemistry, because I can't do that, but I don't have to perform surgery on my kid. I take him to a doctor.
There is a stigma with the term homeschooling, especially from California. They just immediately think you're a religious nut,
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. I mean, props to Emily for trying to change that, but I do think that's an uphill battle because there is this idea, homeschooling, you like shut your kid in the closet with a sandwich and a Bible and let him out at 5 o'clock, and it's like that's not it, but that's the stigma that you're up against, and that's a tough thing to change. So yes, we should be changing how people feel about it, but definitely one of the things that we would need to have in this movie are the parents saying, I thought this was going to be impossible, but it got to the point where what's that phrase? It's like you put off change until the pain of not changing is worse than the pain of changing. And you get parents who finally, it's like, I can't do this to my kid anymore. I have to take him out. And then they find out, oh my God, there's all this support. There are all these other people doing it. There's all these resources I didn't know about. This is the best thing I ever did. And parents need to hear that.
Is it your goal to have, like what Emily said, but have maybe some kind of human interest, success stories, anecdotal evidence, like, okay, you present one possible choice that
that's
parents
the
can
third
take.
part.
Yeah, that's the good news part.
That's the good news part. Yes.
Right, you don't just want to make people feel like, oh God, the zombies are coming, the White Walkers, and we might as well just die. No, you want to get them in a state of, so there's a thing I learned from a professor in graduate school, and he just said it offhand one day, and he said, if you want to make a change in the world, you first have to create some instability. And so the what the fuck sort of knocks you off your feet, and it's worse than you thought, spins you around a little, and now you're actually ready. You just, please throw me a rope. Tell me something so I think it's not as bad as you're making it out to be. So there is a strategy to that.
Well, short stories. When our son was 3 years old, we picked him up from the babysitter, and he said, guess what, Daddy? Uno, dos, tres, cuatro. He could count to 10. His babysitter taught him to count in Spanish. When he was 4, he could recite the German lullaby that my father used to say to me when I was a young child, from memory. And when he was 6 years old, in the public schools, they do this thing called reading buddies, where the 4th and 5th graders would come down and read to the younger kids. When our son was in 1st grade, he was reading well enough to be able to be a reading buddy for his fellow students. And he could read better than some of the 4th and 5th graders. So,
which is nice, but then you have to wonder as a parent, like, wow, what could he be doing if we weren't wasting 8 hours of every day of his life?
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think this, on the front end, is going to have to be very heavy with it's worse than you thought. Because there are a lot of parents out there who don't have a clue that it's bad at all, let alone worse than you thought, number one. Number two, the minute you suggest there's something wrong with the school where you're sending your kid every day, a defense mechanism pops in, because if you're right, that makes them a bad parent,
Oh, yeah.
and they won't accept that.
No, I think one of our favorite pieces of research is one where they go around and ask people, and they routinely say, yes, education's a mess. It's horrible, horrible, but my school's okay.
Yeah.
You know? And it's just, that's what you're up against.
That was another story I was going to share, is that I was at a birthday party last weekend, and most of the kids were at the same public school, tiny school, very cute. They all claim to love their school. It's the Lemster Village School. It's so small. And I think it's like kindergarten through 8th grade or something like that, 250 students, something like that, right? And these kids were in like a combined first, 2nd grade classroom, which I'm like, cool, at least a combined classroom, like that's actually a pretty good step in the right direction. And these parents, the main conversation they were having was, have you heard anything from your kid, like what they're doing? No, I never hear anything. They had no clue what their kids were doing every single day. Absolutely zero clues. They're like, well, I think their reading's improving. I don't know. Like, and they were kind of like trying to get information out of each other. Did you hear anything? Do you know how the teacher is? It's a couple months into a new school year, new teachers and stuff like that, and they just have no idea what's going on.
Nice story. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it also reminds me of the kindergarten story in Grantham. So we have a friend who sent her kid to kindergarten in Grantham, and at the end of the year, she and 2 other people were told that actually an email got sent to all the parents in the class saying, we have 3 kids that we want to congratulate because they're going to be the kindergarten experts next year while they do kindergarten again. There was nothing about those moving on to 1st grade, congratulating them, not at all. And this particular mother was like, no, my kid's going to 1st grade, and her kid is going to 1st grade. She realized she had some choice. Question is whether he's actually ready for it, and that's a whole nother thing that public schools do. No, we get your kid at 5 no matter what, and whether they're ready for kindergarten or not. Croydon has a policy that we don't do that, but we'll see how that goes.
Actually, you know what would be really helpful is maybe like a slide that, like top 7 choices for parents, right? Just like
For a
some
particular problem.
Yeah, or just when we say, oh, you can withdraw your child from the school, or you can just go to the school superintendent, like maybe like concrete, did you know as a parent you can do this, or this, right? Yeah. So it's very concrete, and then maybe like a flow chart out of each of those. Like if you want to homeschool,
Here's how you can go about it.
because I think that is the heart of it, is people don't know they have a lot of choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Right.
that's not
That's
just
what
one
we're trying to
answer.
change. I mean, I like your point, John, and I think it's incredibly important. And so in some sense, you have to do, I guess, what Randy Pausch, he was a professor at CMU, and he used to call it a head fake, where you appear to be talking about something else, and then you suddenly go, oh, by the way, I was actually talking about you. And so you're sort of going, oh, okay.
Third person approach, they call it. The third person approach.
Okay, but it is there. There are things, and that's why we said, like, you can't just come out and say, hey, we need a market for education, because people will have that reaction. They're just like, oh, market. Oh, wait, that's
No, we're solving
evil.
their problems. That's
It's
what
like,
we want to do.
wouldn't it be nice if this was gone? Wouldn't it be nice if that was gone? Wouldn't it be nice if that was gone? Wow, yeah, it would actually. That would actually make my life better and my kid's life better. And then at the end, you may or may not reveal it to say, oh, by the way,
I'll make this relevant to the discussion. Now, it used to be what would happen is I'd come here to pick up my meat from Emily, and then I'd have to rush out to my part-time job. This is the first time in years that I've been able to chill, and I was commenting to some folks earlier about, boy, this is what freedom is about. And maybe there's a way somehow in the framework of what you've proposed to get people to start tasting learning, like learning maybe math over here, science over there, language art there, a foreign language somewhere else, like my son did with his babysitter. Wait a minute. We learned all these things before we ever went to public school. Why am I going to public school?
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah, you want people to ask those questions. So that in a sense, as we said, it's to get people to start asking themselves those things. What if all this stuff wasn't in my way? What would I do differently? And how could the world be? And, you know, without beating them over the head. I mean, you're beating them over the head with certain things just to get their attention and make them just horrified. Because, you know, that's what people are used to. But then you relieve it, you know, at the end. You come back and say, look, it's not quite so bad. It's really, really bad.
They need some good news at the end.
Yeah, but there's a way to get around it.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.